feel right now? What can you feel, and what sort of sensations do you have at this point?
Okay. Well, at this particular point right now, I'll give you sort of the schematic of what I feel right now, but I also, the caveat to that is that it changes every day. Like my sensation and my feeling since my injury, you know, I've mapped it, and it's very organic. So what I do feel right now may change tomorrow, you know, in a little way. In any case, the sort of the hallmarks of what I feel and what I notice in my body. First of all, it's very vibratory. So the quality that I sit with more than anything in my physicality is vibration. Is like almost like there's a Geiger switch sort of in the back of our spinal cord, and right down at the sacrum, there's always a bit of a hum, and that's never left. And so that is part of the physicality. And then the other parts are where I feel normal sensation, which is really just from the neck up. Is I feel temperature, I feel touch normally, I feel heat and cold. But from here down, that all changes, and it's very variable. So, and it's, as I said, changed over the years. But the predominant thing is that the tactile sensation leaves, and there's kind of this zone where I have to learn to speak a different language from here down. So even in my arms, from here down, and all the way through this part of my body, the conversation or the language moves from the surface to the interior. And so I feel, like I can feel myself rubbing my legs right now, but I don't feel it tactilely. I feel it inside as a quality of pressure. I know where my hands are without looking, but I can't tell you where they are on my leg because I can't feel outside. But I could feel inside, right there, right in mid-calf, and they're sort of squeezing hard right now, and they're doing a push-in. And then what I get back from that feedback is a density, a sense of a presence, and if I add things that I do into that, like sound or breath, that'll amplify all of that stuff. And then I also feel my joints. So even though, the normal sort of external sensation isn't there, and I really got this early on, the more I moved them, the more I could feel, like down that limb, even though the limb was paralyzed, the joint was giving me information about the limb and about movement, but more important about feeling and sensation and proprioception. So I've been, really consistent about that, because I get a lot of feedback from my joints. And then I don't feel any cold or heat from here down. So I have a real, danger zone there, because I run into problems with, and I don't make as much heat just because there is paralysis or some of that. So they tend to get cold, but I don't know it. So they'll get stiff quite easily, but I do notice that, and I can feel that. And I don't feel the cold, but I notice it as that. I notice it as a kind of a drawing in. And for heat, I get into trouble because I love heat, and I have very tender and sensitive skin now, which has a very low tolerance point for any type of heat, but it needs a lot of it. So it's an interesting balance that way. And I do tend to get burned here and there. Have had, don't anymore. I'm off that now. So, and I've learned about it. But that was a hard one for me to figure out, because it just didn't cognate oftentimes where my foot, or my leg was down there, and someone would put a hot towel on it, and 10 minutes later it'd be red and like inflamed, and we'd be going, how did that burn? So it took me a while to figure that one out, and it's likely that this tactile sensation would never come back. A lot of my other stuff is, a lot of my motor function is, but that's a very highly sophisticated part of the nervous system that's up here in in an area where there may have been, too much damage, who knows, but that's what I feel anyway.
Do you still have that one place on
I
your
still do,
foot?
and I feel way more, like that whole outer edge of my right foot, it was feeling where you massaged and everybody, it's just amplified and radiated from there, and I work those spots, I'll harvest whatever I can from those areas, whatever they're giving me, I'm going to, go in and juice it up and see how much more information it's willing to offer. And that area is a really important area because I can feel like all the way around the base of the toes now, and these guys are, this leg is much more innervated, I would imagine, or much more responsive. This one's a bit more stiff, so the feet themselves on this leg are really, really active. Like if I put it down, when you're water skiing and you feel those bubbles under your feet all the time, that's what I get under here. When I'm rolling, or if I do yoga or something, I get more of it. It feels like I'm like really water skiing as opposed to slow bubble. So yeah, that's
great. For the changes that have taken place in your body to do with your digestive system or circulatory, I think we've got really good stuff on your circulation and your inner. What about in terms of respiration and digestion? How has your accident, but also how have you seen changes in what happens now, even compared to a couple of years ago with your digestion?
I've been really, really fortunate and really successful in that area, I think, if I could use that as not a sort of an ego thing, but just a very conscious intention. Right from the get-go, I really, first of all, I went to see my guru, and that was one of the first things that he did was look at the digestion and the respiratory system, and he gave me a few prescriptions for that, which were really simple, just a lot of oil on the outer surface of your skin, a lot of oil internally, because the nervous system is predominantly run on oil. And then also he mentioned that in the yogic sort of lineage or terminology, there's 3 different types of body systems, or body types, so to speak, or ways that energy moves in a body. There's a vata body, which is very fight or flighty. There's a pitta body, which is very fiery and directed, and then there's a kapha body, which is more sort of like Julie, very relaxed and methodical. And in a spinal cord body, you're way over on the vata scale here, fight or flight. So his prescriptions were for that constitution, and so anything that I do, I kind of moved my sort of diet and my whole routine more towards that constitution, because I'm more pitta, and that was a really great move. That really, I think, set the tone. And I've never had a problem with my lungs. I've never had a problem with my bowels. I have these beautiful, lovely hour-long commode mornings in my office over there, and I don't take any meds. I don't take anything at all except a good pot of tea, and often that's enough. Sometimes I might need to use cannabis just to relax the peristalsis more, and I've taught the girls to just massage, rub the back of the sphincter muscle at the back of the anus, or so that all those things really are working. And it was partly intuition initially, and partly Frank that was really adamant that we didn't follow the protocol in the spinal cord injury world, which is every 3rd day, or train your bowels not to work, essentially. And I mean, digestion is life. Like if you aren't digesting, everything's going to get clogged from here down. So I didn't want to do that, and I had to really fight for that. That was like one of the first fights I had to battle. But I won that one, and they they couldn't deny me that service if I was adamant that I had to have it. So I said bowels every day, and I like to get up at 8 o'clock and be down to physio by 9. So you guys are on at 7:30, and you're here to do what we need. So that was, that was a big decision for me, and also a really, really important one to establish my, my own responsibility and my own rhythm with my body, and I continue to do that really well. So they work good, and the lungs are, I never took not to say that, this isn't something that some people may need, but I didn't have any therapy done there except for, initially we do, they do the press thing, which was kind of difficult, but it was necessary, I suppose. And then I started to get my lungs working again through pranayama, like basically at night in the hospital for hours on end, where, there was really, I couldn't move. Where am I going to go? What am I going to do? I'll do pranayama. I'll get these things working again. So I would do about 3 or 4 hours of that in the middle of the night, because it was often quiet enough, and it was just a beautiful, time to be with this and integrate and process everything. So the pranayama, I think, was incredibly helpful for me at that time, and I know that's why my lungs came back fully. I never, had that quad. I did have that quad kind of voice that's way up here and kind of like in the front of the chest, and it's the fight or flight voice, and they're still traumatized. They still are traumatized, and that's really the bottom line of a lot of things that aren't dealt with in spine. But
sorry, can you just quickly explain the pranayama?
Yeah.
Well, there was many of them.
But that it's a breathing?
The first one, and the only one I could do right away, it is basically, I think I kind of combined it actually with something else, but I did basically, no, I didn't. I did all of them. Okay, so now I remember. So I did do Ujjayi breath to start, which is basically a breath that takes your egotis at the back of the throat, which was, a very, very interesting area for me to communicate with, because it was still really wounded. So it would bring up stuff, but it would also circulate air there, and I'm sure circulation and just information. And it's basically, so you're channeling the breath into a smaller vortex into the back of the throat.
Just do a little bit.
Jolie does it all day long.
I was going to say that.
It's true.
Yeah. So that was the first piece of the pranayama, and then I would notice that it would bring up stuff. It would bring up the trauma. It would bring up, breath is really connected to our trauma center, and to our diaphragm is right on the spine. So, and knowing that, I thought, no, I need to be more gentle with this. So I did the 3-stage yogic breath then. And that was really neat, because what it did, the 3-stage yogic breath, you start in the belly, then you bring it up to the mid-diaphragm, and then you bring it up into the upper lungs. And of course, at that stage, I couldn't get any air into my lower belly, and I knew that was where I needed to go. So that was my next thing. I started doing the 3-stage yogic breath. And so it was deep into the belly, and then into the mid-chest, and then all the way up into the heart and into the collars, and then exhaling the same way down. So that started to, and I had to be, I could only lay this arm on my belly at the time, because it wouldn't move on its own. So I used it actually as my little gauge to feel, and it would, because I did have a bit of feeling in my hand at that point, not a lot. And I would rub it. I'd put a coarse towel on my, you'll love this, it's all down your alley, coarse towel on my belly, because all the towels at the hospital were so coarse. And I would use this hand to rub that hand and feel the coarseness, so I'd get stimulation into my hand, I'd feel my belly moving, I'd know I could feel down there, because I could feel at least it moving. So there was all these little cues that would happen even in that pranayama time. And then I'd come up here and then notice that I couldn't breathe at all here, and notice that I was breathing mostly up here. So then I started balancing and working with that, and just getting in touch with how to work the breath that way. And then the last breath that I did, 2 more. then I would do one that would be calming my mind, which was, always, waking up out of a fright in the middle of, something or other and going, whoa, whoa, where am I, what am I, how am I? So that I would do the alternate nostril breath, and I would also add in a tantric technique, which is basically to still the mind. So you do one breath per nostril and you count from 50 backwards, and you have to really, there's a lot of focus there because you're counting and you're breathing and you're tracking which side you're on. So you don't have any time to think about, I'm paralyzed or I'm this or I'm that, right? And that would calm my mind by the time I got to whatever number. And the other thing about that one, my teacher said anyway, is if you miss your count or you lose track, you got to go back to the beginning again. So that would usually take me about 2 hours. So then, and that was my pranayama. Yeah.
That's great. You have a quote about movement is life, and you have to keep moving physically and spiritually. It was one of the clips that we used with Rick. Mm-hmm. And that's something that, for us, we'd love for you to be able to explain what movement means to you, both physically and spiritually.
It means a lot more to me now, ironically, after becoming paralyzed, a lot more. And it has altered along with my physical body injury, my concept of what movement is and isn't. And the importance of us understanding movement from, like you said, a perspective of not just the physical, but the mental and the spiritual. We all know that our minds move, our thoughts chatter, 100 miles an hour. We all, kind of get that our bodies do move, sort of. Some of us get that, and some of us just move in them, along with them. And then some of us get that there's a movement of spiritual sort of energy in the body. And that's, I think, the way I look at it. I look at it as a trinity and as an opportunity, really, to synchronize those 3 aspects of movement and also to explore them. We have a journey here in a physical body, but that doesn't mean that we're just physical. And the importance of understanding movement from not just the physical perspective is part of what has shifted for me. And then the other piece that shifted is the understanding of movement in a very, very intrinsic and subtle way. And that, even a breath is a movement. Even a thought is a movement. And even, a intention is a movement. So you get all the spiritual, mental, and the physical there. So when I started to approach, the equation of how to move a paralyzed body, I really had to approach it from those 3 areas and also understandings and practices in it. So it's never just been for me, I'm going to move my leg and go to a gym or go down to a rehab center and try and get these things going again. It's been, a way for me to explore the meaning of movement at its origins, really. And how did we first start moving? Like, what is movement? So, it can be very philosophical, but it doesn't need to be. And the pragmatic, practical part of it is that movement is life, and that, even in a body that's seemingly what we call paralyzed, although I don't really agree with that terminology or that diagnostic, we still are witnessing, countless arenas of movement. Your blood's flowing, your lymph is moving, your heart is pounding, your thoughts are going, your breath is moving, there's tons of movement here. And so giving, that the opportunity to speak in whatever language it might have at this point in time, and giving yourself I think the ability to receive that is really part of the equation of what movement is all about. It's like it's a continuum. And, like everything in life, there's, 2 poles, and we can go from one end of those poles to the other and be extreme. We can be in inertia, or we can be really erratic and chaotic. And in spinal cord injury, the 2 extremes are what seem to be prevalent and dominant. And I suggest that actually there's a place that we can integrate, you know, and not be in such extremes and having to use such extreme measures to have quality of life.
Mary Jo, in describing your rehabilitation techniques that you've used over the last 8 years,
It's going to be 9 this January, Christine.
25th.
9 is a completion, isn't it? And I'm literally, I was going to call you the other day, but we took 12 steps in the pool with weights on. And they were literally like swinging one foot after the other steps. And we were just like, it was surreal. It was the day of the Salvador Dali sunset. You know, and what that means is, no, I'm not going to go out and walk tomorrow. What it means is, you know, there's responsiveness in our systems that's far beyond our understanding and really, certainly our capacities at this point in time to really, to respect, you know, as they need to be. We need to really honor these sacred systems and give them, you know, that, I think that validation and that acknowledgement of how intelligent they are. Like we're so intelligent, and we have this incredible system that, you know, has eons of knowledge, eons, way more than our small brain around this particular 2012 era can even, you know, partially comprehend.
Can you describe?
Sorry.
Yeah.
We need to change the tape, so this might be a
Great.
good time to take a break.
Have a little bite
Yep.
of Zykel cereal.